the very world and scenario that we are experiencing right now is merely a resurrection, a recreation, a perfection, a repeat, a repetition of the same movie that has already played once before.
Wow.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الأئمة والمهديين وسلم تسليما. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear sister and companion Tiffany.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear father.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me back here.
God bless you. So today we want to talk a little bit about death, about extinction, about whether or not these concepts are actually real. Are they false? Is there a need to be afraid of these things? What happens after them? I think from the very beginning of mankind's history, they became acquainted with this unfortunate event that takes place, right? At least in the opinion of man himself. And that is death, the fact that life is not eternal. It was something that deeply scared man and concerned man and saddened man. And we see man still being saddened and concerned by death and seeking to overcome death. It's a very big market. It's a multi-billion-dollar market. All of these anti-aging creams and plans and diets and different types of companies that claim that they can preserve your DNA or freeze your head or your body until a future time where people might perhaps be able to resurrect you, or attempts to transfer your consciousness or preserve your memories into some sort of computer system that can later be downloaded into a human being, so that the person may somehow be able to escape this reality of the fact that their physical biological body that they inhabit, or this suit that they wear, is not made without an expiration date, that there must come a day where it passes away. And we can even see that these modern attempts at preserving the physical body, it's not something that's limited to this modern day and age that we're living in, these attempts of preserving the physical, but it's something that mankind has been attempting to do for thousands of years. And we have the evidence for that being present in ancient Egyptian society and the whole mummification process, where the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with this whole idea of preserving the physical body. And even though they believed in an afterlife and they believed in the concept of the soul leaving the body and traveling, in a different world or a different dimension, they still sought to preserve the physical body, and they went to great lengths to mummify the body and to make sure that it was not basically bothered or destroyed afterwards. And they connected the preservation of the soul with the preservation of the body. And for that reason, they used to build these big tombs, and they used to heavily guard it and make traps and put different types of poisons and things like this to harm all of those that would attempt to rob the grave or do something to the mummified body, because if they did something to the mummified body, then it would perhaps affect the immortality of the soul itself. And so and we have also this concept of the need for the preservation of the biological body kind of leaking into Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We have this concept of incorruptibility that exists. We definitely see it in Judaism, and there are certain narrations that spoke about how the body of Baruch, the scribe of Jeremiah, was not affected by the normal decomposition process that takes place after death, that his body was not decomposing, it was not affected by the insects or the worms or the bacteria of the earth, and that it remained in its state. And this was seen as a miracle and a sign that this was a saint or somebody that was close to God. And certainly in Catholicism also, and you were a former Catholic, this is a big concept in Catholicism, and it is seen as one of the signs that a particular individual would be considered to be a saint. And the popes in the past have declared certain individuals to be saints based on this fact, the fact that their body didn't decompose after death. And they see it as a sign that this individual will be resurrected with Christ, because Christ's body, according to Catholicism, did not decompose. Obviously, it's living, it's alive. He resurrected after death. And so this is seen as kind of a sign that God is preserving, or Jesus is preserving, the bodies of these particularly faithful individuals, so that when he comes back to the earth, that these bodies may rise from the dead once again. And this idea of incorruptibility also exists in the religion of Islam, actually. And it's one of the beliefs that all Muslims have, that the bodies of the prophets and the messengers, actually, and the vicegerents, that they are not corrupted after death, that they are not eaten, that they don't decompose. And they believe that, and they have many stories that when people, for example, were uncovering the grave of Imam al-Hussein or one of the Imams or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the bodies were in the same state as they were. And they believe that if a person was to uncover any of the graves of any of the prophets and the messengers, that they would find the prophet and the messenger in that same particular state, looking as if they were alive, just sleeping. And this is something which is based off of the tradition from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he stated basically that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it haram, he made it forbidden for the insects of the earth or for the creatures of the earth to basically eat on or corrupt the flesh of a prophet or a messenger. So it's an aqeedah, it's one of the beliefs of Muslims. And so the continuity of the flesh, of the body of mankind has always been something that is in the psyche of human beings. It's not just about the continuation of the soul, but people so longed for and so wished for the continuity of the flesh, that people would continue to reside or live in their bodies. They wanted, as a species, to survive as well. And we see there's a lot of talk amongst scientists about other species on the planet that are going extinct every single day, and talking about species such as the dinosaurs and other creatures, saber-toothed tigers, the woolly mammoth, other creatures that lived before us, that went extinct. And they talk about climate change, and they talk about taking measures in order to avoid the extinction of mankind. And they talk about even repopulating other planets, or sending off human beings to other planets in order that the human race may survive in the event of a nuclear disaster. You also see them developing certain technologies that allow allow them to resurrect and bring back to life creatures such as the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed tiger and other creatures that went extinct. And that was the basis of the movie and the novel Jurassic Park, which now actually has become a reality, although they haven't resurrected dinosaurs, but they're resurrecting other creatures, and they're saying within a few years that they will have a woolly mammoth fully alive. And they also resurrected recently a wolf that had gone extinct from the time of the saber-toothed tiger or the caveman. And so this notion, this need, this work, this effort that science is putting into the resurrection of extinct species, really at the core of it, the motivation behind it is to ensure that mankind never goes extinct and to be able to resurrect human beings or certain races if they do go extinct for any reason. And so this is the story of mankind, this kind of search for immortality and hatred of death and hatred of the cessation of existence. So we want to explore this concept and talk about it from a religious perspective. Is it true? Does it ever truly happen that mankind ceases to exist? Does Extinction Day ever truly come upon man? We know that in many of the narrations of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, especially in the understanding that people have of these faiths, they seem to envision that there will come a day where mankind will totally annihilate itself or cease to exist, and that we would move on. That there's this so-called day of judgment or day of resurrection in which life ceases to exist, and then God comes and judges, and then God resurrects people and then makes people enter into heaven or into hell, but that this physical, worldly, earthly realm ends. It doesn't exist anymore. And I think that in order to examine and come to the truth behind this, we have to think like philosophers, think like prophets and messengers, and not merely think like scholars or repeat that which has been given to us in narrations and traditions without thinking alone. And I think that that is the entirety of wisdom in actuality. The entirety of wisdom. What is wisdom that people seek to attain? Wisdom is being able to have this insight that God would give a human being. Wisdom is not to memorize the words of the prophets and the messengers, but rather wisdom is to be able to come to the conclusion and get the answers to the questions that you need at that day and age, simply through insight that God grants you. And how would God grant you this insight? God would allow you to see things that normal people don't see. So people might be walking out into the street, and they would, see the trees and see the rivers and see the people walking around and see the sun and see the sky and see the clouds. But if it was Imam Ali alayhi salam, for example, or if it was Jesus who was walking around and seeing the exact same scenes that normal people would see, they would be able to draw some sort of moral lesson from behind it, or they would be inspired with some sort of insight. They would see in the trees, in the clouds, in the people, something which the rest of the people didn't see. Hence, they have wisdom, right? Or they have this insight from God. And I think that God has told us from the very beginning, and He's even told us in the Qur'an, that we have to gain wisdom through this way, that we have to be open to being taught by everything, and that God teaches us and talks to us in all things. And that's one of the things that Ahmed al-Hassan has told us on many occasions, that God speaks to us through all things, even through a rock. When he says that, it means what? It means that God can teach us a lesson, that there's wisdom hidden behind all things, that God doesn't do things without cause or without reason. So the very the philosopher must consider, right, that if his eyes were granted the ability to see a scene in front of him at any given moment, then in that given moment there is a lesson that God wants the philosopher to extract or to learn from that which his eyes are gazing upon. And it's up to the philosopher then to start working his brain and to not be in a state of sleep and to be more and more conscious and aware and to think like a detective and to try to extract the lesson or to get the logic from behind why it is he is seeing what he's seeing right now. And God granted insight to people in the past, and there's a very famous story of insight that was granted to a particular individual, and that individual was Cain. It was right after Cain slayed Abel. In the Qur'an, he's sitting there and he's beholding the body, the carcass of his brother. And he doesn't know what to do with it now. It's just laying on the top of the earth, and there's blood all over the place. And then, lo and behold, his eyes gaze upon a scene, and he looks and he sees two crows, and the crows are fighting one another, and one of the crows kills the other. And then the crow that was victorious began to scratch in the earth, and it drug the carcass of the brother crow that it had killed. And it buried it, and it began to kick the dirt on top of it in order that it cover the carcass. And Cain, at that moment, he realized something. He realized that that the crows were more advanced than him, that he was less even than an animal, because an animal, his behavior was matching the behavior of an animal, and that is that he resorted to violence in order to settle dispute, and he resorted to murder and death. But he realized that God was telling him that the animals themselves are, have even more decency than you do, and they have more wisdom than you do, and they're able to, and they know how to, properly bury and honor the dead, which he didn't know how to do. But also, I think that it was a lesson for all Muslims who read the story and all people that read the story afterwards to realize from the story with Cain and the crows, and even the story of Solomon and the ant, right, where Solomon is this wise human being, this wise king, and yet he is taught a very powerful lesson according to Jewish narrations and also Islamic narrations from an ant, a very small ant who crawls on him, and everybody knows the story of Solomon and the ant, and if they don't, they can look it up. But it's a very famous story in which Solomon is traveling with his army, and he's feeling rather conceited, and he ends up basically hearing a voice, and he pulls over to the side and he realizes it's the voice of an ant, and then he goes down and he puts his hand and the queen ant crawls on his hand, and Solomon begins to kind of express how he's better than the ant, and the queen ant she establishes the proof upon him, and she says, if you were better than me, then you wouldn't be lifting me up right now, but actually you're the one that's serving me by lifting me. And so she kind of proved that Solomon was being arrogant, and she put him back in his place. And so God is trying to teach us that we can gain wisdom and logic through and insight through that which surrounds us, and that God never leaves us. He's constantly speaking to us. So in the case of death and extinction, we also have to look to nature and how it operates, and to science and all that which we have gained of information and that which we see in front of us, and look for the patterns in nature in order to kind of come up with the answer of whether or not we do ever go extinct or we don't. And we have beautiful stories, Tiffany, in Islam narrations that speak about how God taught man about life after death through sleep and its daily cycles. And so when man became concerned about the fact that he may not exist. After he dies, God granted mankind dreams, so that the people may believe that there is something after death, just like there is something after you go to sleep. And that something is that there's a whole nother world that you travel to and you engage in all kinds of activities afterwards. And so mankind began to understand the concept of an afterlife from something which he was observing in front of his own eyes, and that he learned about reincarnation also, according to certain traditions, from this very act of the repetition of going to sleep and waking up, or that these cycles of day and night, where people die and they wake up, or they die and they're born again. And so you can find an afterlife in something in nature. You can find the pattern for reincarnation within something that is in nature itself. There are these mathematicians that have actually proven scientifically, mathematically, theoretically, all right, that extinction is an impossibility, that it would never happen. There's a Netflix documentary that people could look into. It's called A Trip to Infinity. And it has this particular scene in there in which the mathematician that's speaking is proposing this idea, this problem, when he's trying to speak about the concept of infinity. He says that if you take an apple and you place it into this perfect square box, right? And you left the apple in there for an infinite amount of time, what would take place? And they begin to say that first it would begin to rot, and it would begin to break down and dissolve, and it would begin to change form. All right, and so the form of an apple, it would die away, it would wither, and it would become dust. And then over a particular time period, that dust would begin to turn into a gas. All right, and then there would start to form these types of reactions, chemical, physical reactions would take place until a new form would be born, right? And then he said that basically all the different possible forms that an apple could take would take place in that box. So the apple would transform at one point into a car, it would transform into a banana, it would transform into a human, it would transform into a rabbit, it would transform into every single thing that it could possibly transform into, it would transform into that.
Okay.
Until it exhausted all possible shapes and forms. And then the question becomes, okay, well, then what would happen after that? Because the shapes and forms, they're, they're limited, they're finite, right? There has to be an end to the amount, even though it's a very extremely large amount, but infinite, it exceeds even that, right? Yeah. Like God would survive his creation. God's lifespan is infinite. And so infinity is longer than even the almost infinite amounts of creation that could come into existence. This is what they're pretty much saying. And so after exhausting all the different possibilities, the mathematician says that it would end up returning back to the form of an apple once again.
Wow.
Thus proving that extinction is never possible.
Okay.
Okay?
That's very interesting.
And at the very end of it, they say, and the real question is what if we are the apple? Meaning, like, what if we in this universe that's contained have already gone through this many times before? and we are the apple. There's been a Tiffany, and then Tiffany died, dissolved, and all human beings died and dissolved. And then all of the different types of possibilities happened, and life forms were created on this planet until in the very end of it all, we were created exactly again. The same scenario repeats itself one more time, where Tiffany and myself are sitting in this chair, in this room, in this web house, having this discussion about this particular topic.
I mean, that's fascinating. That's fascinating to consider. And it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that there's this repetition. I mean, we all can observe that that's the way that the universe functions. I mean, there's constant repetition. The sun goes down, the sun comes up, the seasons repeat, you know, in cycles, and everything returns to the way that it had been before. And even, you know,
so you're becoming a philosopher yourself?
Even religiously, like, you know, Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun, right? So like everything just, it repeats. And yeah, I mean, why would we be unique? And why would this be the first time that we are, you know, experiencing this and sitting right here? Who's to say that it has not happened before? It's really fascinating.
It is really fascinating. And when you think about this concept of repetition, not only does it eliminate the fear of the extinction, but it actually confirms a lot of the words of the Qur'an, in which God is saying that is he not able to return you back? Is he not able to resurrect you? Is he not able to, you know, recreate life as he had done it before? And you also have in this book, Al-Haft al-Sharif, this fascinating concept or conversation that took place between Imam Al-Sadiq and between Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar, in which Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam is telling Al-Mufaddal, you know, that there are these various different verses in the Qur'an that recount the conversation that took place between Moses when he was and Pharaoh when he was confronting him and telling him essentially to let my people go. And that in every account of the same story that exists in the Quran, so like in the Torah, for example, you only have one time, it's one account where Moses goes to Pharaoh and he tells them X, Y, Z, and it's just a story that's being told. But in the Quran, it's like repeated. The same story is repeated in many verses. But yet in every time that it is repeated, the conversation that takes place between Moses and between Pharaoh is slightly different. And people have thought in the past that, okay, well, maybe it was in the same setting or the same time, right? Or the same day, the same hour when Moses went to Pharaoh to confront him. He said all of these different lines or all of these different things were said, but they were just spread out throughout the Quran. But Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, no, that actually what was taking place here is that each time that there was a conversation between Moses and between Pharaoh, it was referring to a different Moses and a different Pharaoh. And that before our Adam, there was an Adam and an Adam and an Adam and an Adam and 1,000 Adams. And each Adam had its own Abraham, and it had its own Moses, and it had its own Jesus, and it had its own Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, implying that the very world and scenario that we are experiencing right now is merely a resurrection, a recreation, a perfection, a repeat, a repetition of the same movie that has already played once before. Wow. And so Moses speaks to Pharaoh one thing a long, long time ago, perhaps billions of years ago. And whatever it is that he says to Pharaoh, it doesn't work out so good. It ends up in the same thing. And so God recreates the whole scenario once again. But because we have free will, we slightly alter the conversations, or the characters evolve in a way, or the movie is played out slightly differently so that it may be the same story but yet new. Once again, like the remakes that they make of the Batman movies or the Superman movies, or the different movies.
Wow. I mean, that's so, I mean, it's so cool. It's so cool. That is such great insight into something that is so mysterious, present in the Qur'an. And it's so amazing to know that the Ahlul Bayt had interpreted this and told us, you know, the reality of the situation, the fact that history does in fact repeat, and we have evidence for it in the scripture.
And even today you have physicists that theorize, and they put forward the theory of the multiverse, right? And this idea that there are actually an almost infinite amount of worlds or universes that are existing right now simultaneously with our universe, and that every possibility that could take place is taking place in some particular universe. And that, so there's not one Tiffany, but there's almost an infinite amount of Tiffany's. Every possible Tiffany and every possible choice that Tiffany can make is existing somewhere in a universe, that every universe has. And so even if one universe, humanity became extinct, or Tiffany dies in that universe, she actually wakes up in another universe. And so Tiffany is always in existence because there is an almost infinite amount of Tiffany's that are existing in an almost infinite amount of universes.
Wow. That's really cool.
It is cool. And I think we'll end on this note. I will add one thing to the people and the viewers that are viewing the episode right now, and that is that the truth behind the matter is that there really is no such thing as extinction. Human beings have always existed and will always exist, because God is too powerful and too perfect of a creator that his creation ever ceases to exist. Once he creates something, it is always in existence. And that's certainly what we believe about the soul, and what Jews and Christians and Muslims believe about the soul, that the soul is eternal, but it's not something that people have considered or believe in regards to the physical flesh or the body. We're saying that also it is in regards to the physical flesh or the body. Not only have we came into existence as Tiffany and as Al-Sadiq 1,000 times before, but we will continue to do so. And not only are we existing in parallel universes at the same time as we are existing right now, but also God has this way of dealing with creation, whereby any time a creature becomes extinct on one planet, he is born or created on another planet, so that the universe that we are living in never becomes empty of any single creation at any single time. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So if the saber-toothed tiger becomes extinct on Earth, at that very moment that it becomes extinct on Earth, it is created somewhere else in the universe.
Wow.
And the same is true for human beings. If they go out here, they will appear somewhere else. And if they go out elsewhere, they will appear yet elsewhere. And so in the universe, human beings are always alive, even if they disappear from a particular spot on Earth for a time period, right? Or a particular spot in the universe for a time period, they will still appear somewhere else. And so they are always in existence, not only in other universes, but also in every universe. Every creature is always in existence, very much in the same way that people on earth, they think to themselves that they have eradicated, or even they state that they eradicate a certain disease, right, or a certain plague or a certain bacteria, but it always resurrects or appears somewhere else on the globe at a particular time period. And so nothing really goes extinct. The physical creations that God has created are forever preserved. And we have even narrations from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad that back up this idea. And there is one particular narration that I'll leave the audience with, and this is, it was concerning the punishment that beheld the people of Ad and Thamud. And basically the narration stated that when God decided that he was going to bring the punishment down on the people of Ad, there were believers from Ad, a few believers, but the majority of them were disbelievers. And God doesn't bring down a punishment upon a people so long as they have believers in them. And so what took place was that God commanded particular angels to go forth and to remove those believers of Ad from their nation. And he took them to another garden from the gardens of God, another planet from the planets of God that exists in the universe, and he placed them over there. And we have many narrations that talk about this idea of there being planets in the universe that are inhabited with life. And some of them refer to a couple planets called Jabalaka and Jabarusa. And these two planets have creatures on there that had never disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the idea is very clear, and it's very evident in the narration that even though those people went extinct on Earth, they ended up appearing on another planet. And that perhaps that the implication is also that perhaps that is the exact same way how Adam and Eve appeared on this planet, that they were first brought here as believers from a different realm or a different world.
Wow. Wow. I mean, you've blown my mind today. Thank you so much, Al-Sadiq.
God bless you, Tiffany.
This is such a fascinating topic, and I think that you've given us a lot to think about. And yeah, I mean, this final narration, it would make a lot of sense.
And it's a beautiful idea, and I hope that, like, you know, the people that are watching also realized how poetic it is. That now we can look at extinction in a different way.
Yeah.
That it's really just an interplanetary migration program or relocation program. That's all that it is.
Yeah, there's nothing to fear.
God bless you, Tiffany. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wow, this was an incredible episode, and Al-Sadiq, from his peace, has given us an important key to understanding a truth in the world. When the ancient people, they used to look at the sun and how it used to set and then return and rise in the morning, they saw it as a proof for reincarnation and the fact that life occurs in a cycle. And they used to look at the seasons and how the earth would die in the winter and then be reborn again in the spring. But now we know that there is more to this story. We know that when the sun sets in one place, it actually rises in another place. And when the earth in the apparent dies in the winter, you know, somewhere across the world, it is the summertime. So what dies in the apparent actually never ceases to exist. And now we know this to be the case and the reality. And it's important that we look at nature, you know, as a guide, because God has given us all of the things that surround us in order that we may learn from them and that we might extract wisdom from them. And now we know this to be the truth from Al-Sadiq, from him his peace. You know, for anybody who fears death, there's nothing to fear, because nothing that God has willed into existence ever ceases to exist. And there's a great comfort in knowing that. I hope that you learned as much as I did through this beautiful episode, and that you'll continue on this journey with us in the School of Divine Mysteries.